Three, two, one, and we're live. Thanks again for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made podcast. My name is Maveo Heimoli, and if this is your first time tuning in, please consider subscribing. And for those that are returning, we appreciate you. Also, don't forget to check C4 Designs we have some gear, some merch. So check us out there, and don't forget to use code VMP15 for 15% off your purchase. And that's also ways of supporting us. And if you continue to like, subscribe, and share and comment on our YouTube channel, that is also another way of supporting us here at the Village Made podcast. But today we got a special guest, which is basically childhood friends. We went to the same elementary, same school, same ward. And so we have today Ofa Kanuch. Thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, we appreciate your time, and just especially looking forward to learning from you and just hearing your story. But just to get into it, let's begin with the story of your name. Who named you and the meaning of your last name?
Okay, so my name is Ofa. My first name means love, like most common Tongan name. Named after my dad's oldest sister, Ofa, who is also my fahu. And then my middle name is Ku'uleilani Mekealoha. It means lay of love from heaven in Hawaiian. And I'm not Hawaiian, but my parents, after three boys, I was the first girl. And then my parents decided to give me a Hawaiian name. And then my last name is Hafoka, and then Kanuch for my husband.
And then with Hafoka, do you know, is there a meaning for the last name, or is it just a name?
I don't know if there's a meaning, but
Okay.
Hafoka is actually my great-grandpa's first name.
Okay.
And so my family took that as our last name. But I'm not related. There are a couple other Hafokas in Utah especially, but we're not related. But that's just because that's my great-grandpa's first name.
Nice. And what villages in Tonga are your parents from?
My dad is Finau Hafoka. He is from Fa'ui.
Okay.
And then my mom is Lucy Ofahengawe Hafoka, and she is from Talafa'o.
Nice. And then, do you know the migration story of your parents from Tonga to the island, to Hawaii?
Yeah. So my parents came separately. They met at BYU Hawaii, but they came separately. My mom went to BYU Hawaii, and her parents and her family moved around the same time.
Okay.
Because my grandpa had an opportunity to do a teaching certificate there. So her family came around the same time, and they were able to get citizenship through my grandma's sister. My dad was the first one from his family, and he went to BYU Hawaii, and it wasn't until my parents were already married, had a couple kids, then his family was able to come. So his parents, his sisters came. They lived in like the town area in Hawaii, and then they were able to move to Laie and then in with my parents. So I grew up with both of my grandparents. And I was really lucky that both sets of grandparents were able to come to Hawaii and then get their citizenship later on.
Dang, sounds amazing that you had both sets of grandparents. What are some of your favorite memories with your grandparents?
I think growing up, I didn't realize how lucky and how fortunate I was. Right. It was just all that I knew to have like three sets of parents to answer back to tell me what to do. Right. But I think as I get older, I realize what a blessing it was for me to learn from both grandparents, from my parents, and to have a lot of the culture, the gospel passed down to me through the examples of so many people in my family.
Dang, sounds like an awesome childhood. And then for you, where were you born and raised?
I was born and raised in Hawaii. So all of my siblings, my parents met at BYU. They stayed there, and then we were all born and raised in Hawaii. I didn't move until like after college, after my mission, I moved here to Utah. Nice.
And for you, maybe what are some of your, going off of your favorite childhood memories, what were some of those things like? And then, growing up in the village, I guess, which is the same village I grew up in, and so what are your favorite memories?
And I think you have a lot of people on this podcast from our village, so that's really nice for me to hear a lot of similarities. For me, what sticks out to me the most from our village is the sense of community and belonging. Like I always just felt like I had friends, Tongan friends in the ward, at school. I just always felt like I belonged. And I never really had to question like my identity, who I was, because I always had like a strong foundation in our community. And I think that's like one of the most special things about our community, and also about our culture, because I feel like even moving here to Utah, there is a Polynesian community here, and I can fit right in because anywhere we go in the world, we can connect with people. And so that was, I think, for me, one of the biggest highlights of childhood, is always knowing that I knew people around me who loved me and who would parent me just the same as my parents would, and correct me if I needed to, but also praise me if I did something well. So yeah, that's, I think, one of the highlights of my childhood.
Yeah. And because you had both sets of grandparents, maybe what were some of the traditions and culture that was passed down, from your grandparents to you, in the culture sense?
Yeah. So my maternal grandparents, they spoke English really well. And my grandpa was a school teacher. He was in school administration in Tonga. My grandma was a nurse in Tonga. And so when they moved to Hawaii, I didn't realize when I was young, because they worked at the Polynesian Culture Center. And so I didn't realize, to me, until I was older and I went back to Tonga, and I think as an adult, I can make sense of some things, but I didn't realize what a demotion it was for them to go from like really prestigious jobs to working at the Polynesian Culture Center. And I think that sacrifice and hard work were really passed down or taught through my grandparents and also the value of education through my grandparents on my mom's side. My dad's parents, they had a different history in Tonga. My grandpa and grandma I'm pretty sure they just had an elementary education, formal education. But my grandpa worked really hard in the farm. And so in Kahuku, he always went to the farm. And that's what he did growing up. And they spoke Tongan to us in our home. So that's where I learned to understand Tongan. I can speak back to them only because I feel like they're the only ones that can understand my Tongan. But that's where I learned hard work also, in like hands-on, going to the farm kind of hard work. And I feel like their lack of formal education helped to motivate me, because I had these opportunities that they didn't have. Right.
That's a amazing story with especially your grandparents going to the farm. I had Kautai on a couple of weeks ago, and he talked about the farm, and if you know their family, that's all they just rooted in the farm.
And it was the same farm. It was the same farm too that my grandpa would go to.
Exactly.
Yeah, that my grandpa.
And so I thought that was like a good experience, like for him to express how, the lessons learned from going to Uta, and, him also taking his family back to kind of like experience what he went through when he was a young kid,
Yeah.
And so I kind of enjoyed those experiences. And then also just you speaking about Tongan, especially with my Tongan as well. I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel judged when I speak my Tongan to other people. So that's why I only feel comfortable speaking it to like my parents, maybe, or you know what I mean? Like, there's only a few people that I would speak my Tongan to, but anyone else, nah, because I feel judged, or just kind of feel like, oh, I don't know if I got it right, but I don't know. It's just kind of awkward, like wanting to speak, but the want to speak is there, but it's just, I don't know, lack of confidence and just kind of like, I don't know, but I'm glad that you brought that up. I think that was cool. And then I know because your parents, especially your dad, he was always called to be like a bishop and then stake president. And at the moment he's a mission president. So kind of like growing up, did you ever feel like the pressure because your dad is like someone in the bishopric to always like do well, you know what I mean? Or like, oh, they're looking at you because you're the daughter, you know what I mean? Or you're the kids of whether it's a bishop or a stake president,
I think that if I look back at specific times of my childhood, I could say yes. I also think that at the same time, not only, like it wasn't only pressure, it was like motivation, because my dad was in school, because he was my elementary school counselor. And then when I went up to intermediate and high school, he also went up to high school. So, but I also felt like I always that was my point of contact if I needed help. And so I just remember long nights I would just have to wait for my dad to come home so he could help me on this math problem that I knew that he knew the answer for. And so that to me was like, yes, there is pressure, but he would always say, where much is given, much is required. And so I always felt like there's probably pressure like in my family, in the community, but also I have a lot of opportunities that I could capitalize on and that could actually motivate me to get to where I'm at right now.
And then, well, I don't know if you want to answer this, but just speaking of maybe kind of pressure, but also sports in your family. Your 3 older brothers before you, you know, they were like they did pretty well for themselves in high school, you know, and then they moved on to college. And then did you feel pressure to play sports at all? Or, you know, how
I think
did
in
that
the
feel
community, I think it was more so like if you go to Kahuku High School, there is pressure to do well in sports. From a young age, my parents just, they wanted me to develop talents, but it was never like, I want you to play sports. So like as a little kid, I did dance, I did choir, I did piano.
Yeah, piano for sure. I remember that.
So my brothers were good in sports. All of them, they played sports, they played football, they came to BYU, they played sports here. But I also felt like since Spencer is the brother right above me, I wasn't going to follow Spencer's footsteps in sports because he was so good at it. And I just felt like but I could also find other avenues to do well in. And I really appreciate that my parents didn't force me or didn't place that pressure on me to do well in sports, because there were a lot of other ways that I could do well in.
I think that was great foresight also, you know, from your parents to develop other talents instead of sports, or, you know, instead of pushing you to go to sports, like just like you said, dancing and piano. And especially with piano, you contributed to our ward, you know, whenever the ward needed a pianist for, you know, whether it's sacrament meeting or during primaries.
And I hated it too, right? You know what I mean? I hated it growing up. Like I didn't like practicing, and no one really, sometimes when it comes down to the hard work of doing like behind the scenes, practicing piano and messing up all the time, it wasn't that I loved it all the time, but I think my parents taught just consistency and whatever I wanted to choose.
Yeah, I think that was interesting, or, you know, that was cool. And then also growing up, maybe now looking back, you know, as an adult and as in being married yourself, what are some of the sacrifices that your parents have made that you look back now and be like, man, that was, you know, something that benefited you and your siblings? I
think one of the biggest sacrifices is to live and raise us in Hawaii. It's so expensive there. And it is a sacrifice that came out with a lot of like big rewards for them. I didn't realize that was a sacrifice just because our childhood was, I felt like just like so fulfilled, right? And there's just, we had a great childhood that I don't think that they would look at it as a sacrifice either, but living here and trying to be on my own in Utah, I feel like just financially, that's a sacrifice. I think my grandparents and my parents moving from Tonga to America was a sacrifice. Establishing a family, that was their sacrifice for me. And I think that pursuing an education, my degree in hand to give back to them is my way of honoring their sacrifice. Right.
And then speaking of your degree, can you talk on the education, especially because your parent or your dad got his master's, right? And can you speak on that? And then now there's 3 of you, or, you know, a few of your siblings that have, you know, gone on and not only have their masters, but gone on to further their education even more. So can you like talk about just the expectation? Maybe was it an expectation for you guys to do better than your dad, you know, because he got a master's?
Yeah, I think it was always motivating. I think my parents always said, we will do our best to get our education, but we want you to do better and to go further than we did. And my mom's family and her siblings all have their degrees. They have bachelor's degrees, master's degrees. Her sister has a PhD. I knew that that they valued education. My dad was the first one to graduate from college from his family, and then he went on. And I watched the long hours. We were kids when my dad had a church calling in our ward.
Right.
He went to school. He worked full time, drove an hour to school, came back when we were asleep, and so I watched the hard work and sacrifice that it took for him to get his degree, and also he worked in school counseling, and so I feel like my passion for counseling came from watching him do well and excel in his work.
Right.
And my mom was also in school too. She was an English and second language teacher. And so I think having parents as educators helped me to stay motivated and to know that it was just going to be the next step. I never had to question, am I going to go to college? It was kind of just laid out for me. And then even after I graduated from college, I just knew that, the next step would be grad school, because I had people in my life to look around and to see. Like my auntie had her PhD, and so I just felt like, I can do it because my auntie Valu had her PhD. So I think that education was highly valued in my family. We were motivated to do well, and I think that my parents did their best to help us along the way so that it didn't feel too much like pressure.
Right.
Which I think that in Polynesian cultures, we are going to have pressure because we are the generation living in America, and we have these opportunities that generations before waited for and they worked for. So I think that to some degree there is pressure, but it doesn't always have to be bad all the time. And I think that for me, and I think maybe my siblings too, but I think that for us, we tried to leverage that and make sure that it was motivating for us to do our best.
And with your grandparents, would they be proud of you for the sacrifice they made to move across, the ocean, and the person that you, not that you're a final product, but the person you're becoming or that you're striving to become?
I think that they would be. I think that if I look at all four of my grandparents, I think that they would be proud of me, my siblings, but also just the community effort and investment in us. Yeah. I think that I'm so lucky because I get to be the one to go to work and I have the degree, but in reality, it's everyone. It's everyone that helped me since I was a little girl to do well in all of these things. So I think that they would be proud of not only me, but of everyone that helped me.
Nice. So you mentioned earlier that your dad went to school, got his education, got his master's, and you also went to school. And can you talk about where you went to school and what you got your degree in?
Yeah, so I did my bachelor's degree at BYU Hawaii. I lived at home, went to college. Then after a couple of years, I came to BYU here in Provo, and I did a PhD in counseling psychology.
Dang. That's crazy. And what made you get into counseling psychology, or what was, I guess you kind of mentioned it earlier, was it your dad, or
I think it was partly my dad,
Mm-hmm.
because I watched him be a school counselor. I went to BYU Hawaii thinking that I was going to do med school, biology, chemistry, and I realized first semester that I wasn't interested in it. I wasn't good at the hard science classes, and I saw that my uncle Inoke Funaki was a professor there in psychology.
Nice.
And so that helped me to be interested in psychology. And once I started taking the classes, I felt like it would be a field that was similar to my dad's, similar to my auntie Valu's in social work. So I just thought that would be a good fit for me then. And
Nice.
then when I graduated from there and I was looking for a program, I was interested in counseling psychology, so that I could help our Polynesian community, but also it's general enough that what I thought in grad school is that I could always specialize in what I wanted after I graduate. Mm-hmm. So that's why I went that route.
Nice. And being in your program now, are there any other Polynesians, or are there a lot of females in that program?
There weren't a lot of females when I was in school. There are several males, Polynesian males, that went through the same program even before me. So that was really helpful to see that other people of similar backgrounds as me excelled through that specific program.
Right. And with being a Polynesian or Tongan, in this field and in this program, what do you feel like we as Polynesians have to offer the world, maybe in maybe this program or just in general?
Yeah. I think when it comes to mental health, there are so many strengths already that we don't realize that we do in our culture. One of the things that I mentioned about our community is just having someone to talk to like at any time. I could always just have a friend, have a cousin, an auntie. And I feel like one of our strengths as Polynesian people is that we show up and we support for anything that's big or small. Everyone is always there, and I feel like we show our support through our presence.
Yep.
And so when we're there for each other, when there's a funeral, there's a wedding, even just football games, like everyone comes because that's our way of supporting. And I think that that sense of unity, that sense of belonging, that sense of community is a really big strength that as Polynesian people we have.
Right.
I think another strength in our community is also just that as a culture, we have faith in a higher power, right? And so we have faith in God or multiple gods. And so I think that just having faith in higher power and spirituality is a really big coping skill that I've seen in our culture, but also like as I'm learning in school, that I see that other cultures as well use that as a really strong coping mechanism when they're going through hard times. And I'm really grateful that we already have that like kind of embedded in our Polynesian culture.
Yeah, that's amazing, especially with faith and family. That's the big keys, in our culture. And then
I also think, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off.
Yeah.
I also think that the idea of giving back, so reciprocity is huge in our culture. And it's not so much like you gave me something, I'm going to give it back to you.
Yep.
It's like when God gives me something and when I'm blessed with something, I'm going to go back and help as many people as I can. And I think that I've watched that in my parents, in my family members, extended family members, in our community, just like the willingness to give when we receive things that like are blessings for us. We always feel like, oh, I could offer my talents and my time because I'm blessed with so many things.
Right. And that's what our, these God-given talents that we're given is not for us to sit on, or it's not for us to hide, but it's for us to share, and to share with the world. And that way we can inspire others or motivate others. And so I think that's amazing, that you mentioned that. And then I think on the flip side of what we have to offer, maybe what are some things in our culture we have to unlearn?
Yeah, I think in terms of mental health, and I think right now there's a push for mental health in maybe our generation. And I think that with that comes also the challenge to acknowledge emotions, because that's where it could start in our families is like how can we acknowledge that emotions or the difficult emotions that we feel, so like the sadness, the pain, the anger, how can we acknowledge that those are not bad emotions to hide or to avoid? Because I think what I'm seeing, and this is across cultures, but I'm just going to speak to our culture because this is what I know. But I think what I'm seeing is that a lot of times people get uncomfortable when someone else is crying. And so if that makes me uncomfortable, I'm going to do everything that I can to minimize their pain in the way that I know how. So I'm going to try to cheer them up. I'm going to tell them to look on the bright side. And then we're just going to try to avoid the pain, when in reality, that pain just builds up until the point that like they're gonna explode. And then we wonder, well, where did that come from, right? When it was already there and we just didn't acknowledge that it was already there. So I think that as a culture and as a community, we can work on acknowledging all emotions and not just the feel good positive ones. And we can even just make space for it, so we can feel it, we can sit with it, and we don't have to try to rush to minimize and pacify the pain, because that's part of life. And I think that for like a big part of our culture, we do acknowledge some pain, right? So we look at, well, there are some things that you can acknowledge, like a funeral or even just a physical injury. We can acknowledge that openly, and everyone else comes to support you. But I think in terms of mental health, where it's more invisible and harder to see, it's that's more difficult for people to sit with in general, but I'm seeing that in our own community.
Just as you were speaking, something that came to mind, and maybe you want to touch on it, is especially in our Polynesian culture, laughter or sarcasm is a way of minimizing, right? Or like as soon as somebody expresses a feeling or expresses like their true thoughts, then like the first thing we do is cut them down, or like, but we cut them down with a joke, or we're like, hey, what are you talking like, and so I don't know, that's something that we have to maybe unlearn as well.
Yeah, and I think that like Polynesians, we know how to have a good time.
Exactly.
And that's a strength. And that could be like a highlight of our culture and of our families is we know how to have a good time. We know how to entertain. But I think that when it maybe goes too far is, again, when it feels uncomfortable, like, oh no, someone is being vulnerable. We don't know what to do. So then let's be sarcastic and let's find humor in this. That's their way of trying to help when in reality it might not be as helpful. And so humor can be a really good coping skill, but sometimes when we take it too far or when our sarcasm is at the expense of someone else, and our humor, when someone else is the target of our humor, then sometimes, and that's just not helpful. And so I think we have to learn to distinguish between like when is everyone having a good time and when are we having a good time teasing you. Yeah.
Okay. And so with this the thought of unlearning, maybe are there other things that we could unlearn maybe and relearn?
So I think going along with sometimes we don't talk at all about hardships or about emotions. Sometimes we take it to the other extreme where we broadcast everything that we're going through. And I think social media could be a really good tool to connect, especially when we are living across the ocean from our family in Hawaii. Social media is a good place to connect and stay in contact with people. And I also think that where it could be harmful is when people, and I'm not calling anyone out, but just when people in general, broadcast everything that they're going through without finding the specific people that could actually help them. And so I think what we could learn as a people is just to be intentional with who I'm going to share something personal or something vulnerable with, because I know the kind of specific support they can offer to me. And I don't have to share it with everyone until I'm ready. And I can share with everyone after I've gone through the process of understanding what this means and understanding how I can help myself and cope with it. And then I can go out and share with the world. But sometimes I just feel like sometimes it's, and it's a hard place to distinguish when to share, when not to share. But sometimes in oversharing, we don't get the support that we need. And I think that's just an easy way to measure, like, is this helpful for me? Because if I go on Facebook and share all of my mental health issues, who is actually going to support me in that way? And am I getting help from anyone or no one at all or everyone? And so I think just being very intentional. I'm going to tell these two people about my hardships because I know the kind of support that they can give me, and also being okay with seeking professional help. Because I think that we are okay with going to a medical doctor if we get hurt or if we get injured. There's no question in going to a medical doctor. And I think that there's just a big overlap with the mind-body connection in our culture, which is a really good thing. But sometimes we overlook the mind. So we overlook like mental health issues because we're only looking for the physical issues. And sometimes they're connected because we will feel like our body feels sometimes before our minds can catch up, make sense of it. So I will feel like anxious before I know that it's anxiety. But I think that people, and this is not specific to our culture, again, this is across cultures, but I think in general, it's easy to overlook the mental health issues if we're so focused on just the physical issues that we have. Right.
And then you mentioning seeking support from people that are qualified. Maybe what are some of those people? Are you only therapists, or are there other people besides therapists?
I guess it just depends on the issue. I think that mental health therapy is a really helpful resource for for people to use. And we have people from our communities who have like the professional background to help with the mental health part. But I think that even just if you go back to the islands where we come from, there are specific people like in the villages who know specific things. I remember when I was growing up in Hawaii and I had like a sty eye, I would go to Wike in our ward because she knew how to treat it. And so I think just the same thing when we're going through physical issues, we know a person to go through. The same with mental health issues. Therapy is not the only resource. Like individual therapy is not the only resource. There are courses online. There's social media online with people who are trying to offer just some information. So I think the education part is also just as important as seeking specific therapy.
Nice. You know, growing up in the village or growing up where we grew up, we have personal experiences. Well, I'm just going to say for myself, you know, I have personal experiences of, just getting beat up from, doing something that I wasn't supposed to be doing or whatever it was, And then just in feeling those emotions, like not knowing how to process those emotions because you're told, oh, stop crying. You're like, why are you crying? Or like, oh, I'm getting beat up. That's why I'm crying, Or like, go to your room, or be quiet, And so at that young age, until you can't get beat up anymore. But when you're getting beat up or when you're, just these different emotions, how do you process those emotions? And now that I'm older, I'm learning to process these, or learning how to like, oh, I'm starting to feel this way or, these are the things that trigger me or, you know what I mean? And so I feel like maybe what are some things that we can do to process them or try to feel, how it feels, I guess.
Yeah. And I think that in our community, we can all relate to those experiences. And, when we are little, we internalize those messages. So as a little kid, if I hear over and over and over, stop crying, then I've learned that crying is bad or that crying is a sign of weakness if we're looking at strength and weakness. So I think that's like really common. And I think that what I've had to learn through school and through doing therapy is that it's helpful if you just neutralize all emotions. So emotions are just giving you information about your experience. There's no good or bad emotion. And so because when we grew up, we just thought that, oh, these are the list of bad emotions that I can't share, that I can't talk about, that I can't express. And so we've learned to avoid or do everything that we can to try to avoid until it becomes too difficult for us to hold it in. So if you just neutralize all emotions, that makes space to feel any emotion. And if you can just say, okay, well, what am I feeling right now? Is it sad? And what do I need to do to express this emotion? Do I need to cry? And how can I let myself cry without hearing the messages that I've heard that crying is bad and that you're not supposed to cry? So I think in order for us to process the emotion, first we have to recognize what we're feeling. And even just going back to how can I feel anything without judging myself for feeling it, without thinking that I'm going to get into trouble or without thinking that other people are going to judge me. And how can I just make space to feel it? And then what do I need to do with this emotion? So if it's anger, what do I need to do to calm down or what do I need to do to express this anger? And for me, I think like some coping skills that would really be helpful is just self-care. Just take care of your like sleeping patterns, eating regularly throughout the day so you're not skipping any meals. I think exercising regularly throughout the week. That helps me to take care of my physical body so that I could tune in to my emotional body when my emotions come up. I think also just like sometimes people are like hangry or tired, and those are like things that really affect our mood and our emotions. So just tuning in, like, am I angry or am I tired right now? Or am I hungry right now? Or what am I actually feeling? And how can I let myself feel anything without judgment to myself?
Nice. Speaking of our parents' generation or the older generation, how can we in our generation connect with them? Because I feel like they still kind of don't take it serious. Maybe not taking it serious, but they just don't feel like it's real at times, because they're the ones telling us to, be quiet or go to our rooms or, even nowadays, maybe talking about emotions and stuff that they don't take it. But what are your thoughts on that maybe?
Yeah, one thing that I'm recently learning as a way to connect to our older Polynesian people is to bring in sources that they would see credible.
Right.
And so in our culture where spirituality, where faith, where belief in this higher power in God, Christianity is really big,
right.
I find that pulling sources from church, and this is like in whatever denomination you belong to, but if you can find your church leaders or even scripture references as a way to start the conversation. So even saying, I found this, or like this person that you in your eyes would be like someone that you trust or believe, this person said this, and how can we apply that in our family? How can we apply that in our lives? I'm seeing that that's like one way that we could open the door to talking about mental health issues with the older generation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, man, I appreciate all the knowledge that you've been giving us, and especially talking about mental health, because it's a big push now. We see a lot of it in social media with the people that are around us, especially in our community, Polynesian community. And so, just grateful for your knowledge and for you wanting to share. And just at this time, we'll just go ahead and end with some rapid fire questions. Okay. So just the first thing that comes to mind, whatever that is, go ahead and share that with us. So what takes up too much of your time?
Thinking.
What do you wish you knew more about?
Budgeting.
Who or what inspires you?
My grandparents.
What are some things you had to unlearn?
That all emotions are okay.
What's your favorite book?
How to be an anti-racist.
What's special about the place you grew up?
Unity, belonging. It was a close-knit community.
What have you only recently formed an opinion about?
Weightlifting.
What's the luckiest thing that's happened to you?
Meeting my husband.
Shout out Tuni. What are you looking forward to in the next 10 years?
Having a family, hopefully helping out the Polynesian community where I can, when I can, and hopefully being established in my career.
Nice. What song will guarantee to make you dance?
Thinking About You, Sarah.
What could you give a 40-minute presentation on with no preparation?
Anything mental health, or maybe not anything, depression, anxiety, mental health.
What hobby would you get into if time and money weren't an issue?
I think photography.
Nice. When people come to you for help, what do they usually need help with?
Mental health problems.
Right. What's something you think everyone should do at least once in their life?
Travel outside of the country they were born.
Which of your scars has the best story behind it?
I don't have scars. I was really safe as a kid. So I didn't break a bone ever. Right. I didn't play sports. So I don't think I have very many scars.
Nice. What helps you live in the moment?
I think being very intentional about living in the moment. So when I can pay attention to what's around me, that helps me stay present.
Nice. And last question. If you could give back to your village, how or what would you do?
I would help youth in our communities who are trying to pursue higher education. I would try to help our community in any way that I can in terms of educating or coping with mental health problems.
Nice. Well, again, thank you for your time. I really do appreciate it, For those tuning in, go ahead and follow Ofa at dr.ofa on Instagram. She puts out a lot of great information on mental health.
Thanks for having me.
I really appreciate it. But thank you again for your time. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of the Village Made Podcast. It's a privilege and a power to be Polynesian, and these are our stories. Our stories are powerful.